بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Our chapter today is about limits. Let's begin with some remarks about limits. Let k be a strictly positive real number. So k is a real number and k is strictly greater than 0. Now let's complete each table below together. Now what is positive infinity plus k? It will be positive infinity because positive infinity in this case represents a very large quantity, and if we add another quantity to a very large quantity, it becomes larger and larger. Now what is positive infinity minus k? This is also positive infinity because if we subtract a certain quantity from a very large quantity, it remains large. Now what is positive infinity times k? This is positive infinity, and remember k is positive, and positive infinity divided by k is also positive infinity. Now what is positive infinity minus k? This is also positive infinity, and positive infinity minus k is positive infinity. Positive infinity multiplied by a negative number is negative infinity because positive times negative in this case is negative. And finally, positive infinity divided by negative k is also negative infinity. Again and again, I'd like to remind you that k is a positive quantity. Now, what is negative infinity plus k? This is negative infinity, and negative infinity minus k is negative infinity. Negative infinity times a positive k is negative infinity, and negative infinity divided by k is negative infinity. Now negative infinity plus negative k is negative infinity, and negative infinity minus negative k is negative infinity, and so on. Now what is plus infinity plus infinity? It's plus infinity because if we have a larger quantity plus another larger quantity, it will be very large. Now this is one of the controversial issues. What is plus infinity minus infinity? This is what we will call later an indeterminate form, so we cannot tell its answer now, but we're going to see some approaches and methods that will be used in order to find such limits. Now what is positive infinity times positive infinity? This is positive infinity because positive times positive is positive, and positive infinity divided by positive infinity, this is also an indeterminate form that we cannot tell its answer now. Now what is positive infinity plus negative infinity? This is also an indeterminate form, and this is in fact the same as this one because we have plus infinity minus infinity. And in this case we have positive infinity minus negative infinity, which is positive infinity plus positive infinity, and this is positive infinity. And in this case we have negative infinity, and here we cannot tell because this is the same as that case because we have positive infinity divided by negative infinity. In fact, one of the indeterminate forms is summarized as infinity over infinity. So whether it's positive infinity or negative infinity, there is no difference. Okay. Now in this case, if we have plus or minus infinity and we add 0 to that quantity, it tends to plus or minus infinity. If we subtract 0, it tends also to plus or minus infinity. Now if we multiply by 0, we get an indeterminate form, and this is what is summarized as infinity times 0 is an indeterminate form. And I'm going to remind you also that we're going to solve the case of indeterminate forms later in this video. Now what is positive infinity divided by 0 plus? This tends to positive infinity. Remember, dear students, that anything divided by 0 tends to infinity, but 0 over 0. Now finally, if we have positive infinity divided by 0 minus, this is negative infinity. This is the same as the previous case. The only difference is in the sign, and this happens because positive divided by negative is negative. Now here also we are dividing by 0, so we get an infinity, which is negative. Here we have positive infinity, and 0 over 0 tends to an indeterminate form. Now let's see what are the indeterminate forms. you can see that we have plus infinity minus infinity from here, and we have infinity over infinity from here. This is also plus infinity minus infinity, and here we also have infinity over infinity. Here we have infinity times 0, and here we have 0 over 0. So we have in fact 4 indeterminate forms, which are plus infinity minus infinity, infinity over infinity, infinity times 0, and 0 over 0. Now here k and m are two strictly positive real numbers. In other words, k is greater than 0 and m is greater than 0. Now try to complete each table below. Try to pause the video, complete it alone, and then compare your answers. Now, k is a strictly positive real number, so k is greater than 0, and L is any real number. We can say that 0 over infinity tends to 0. Now, L over infinity tends to 0. In fact, anything over infinity tends to 0, but infinity over infinity. Now, k over 0 plus tends to plus infinity, and k over 0 minus tends to minus infinity. Remember, anything over 0 tends to infinity, but 0 over 0. Now here, if we have negative k over 0 plus, because we have something over 0, this tends to infinity, and minus over plus is a minus. And negative k over 0 minus tends to plus infinity. And we have 4 indeterminate forms, which are infinity over infinity, 0 over 0, plus infinity minus infinity, and 0 times infinity. Now later, we're going to see how do we deal with indeterminate forms. Now, how do we calculate limits? The first step in calculating limits is the substitution. Let's see what do we mean. To calculate a limit of a function, the first step is to use substitution. Let's find the following limits. What is the limit of this function as x tends to 1? So we just replace each x by 1 and see what happens. In this case, if we replace x by 1, we get 3 minus 3 plus 2, which is 2. So the answer is 2. Now, what happens if we want to find the limit of this function as x tends to plus infinity? We also replace, we get plus infinity plus 2, and this is plus infinity because remember, plus infinity represents a very large quantity, and if we add another large quantity to it, it becomes larger and larger. Now, what is the limit as x tends to minus infinity? If we replace each x by negative infinity, we get negative 3 times negative infinity, which is plus infinity, and then plus 2, this becomes plus infinity. Now, what is the limit of this function as x tends to plus infinity? If we substitute by substitution, we get 5 over infinity, and as I said before, a number over infinity tends to 0. So this is 0. Now, what is the limit as x tends to 2 of this quantity? We just replace x by 2, and we don't replace it by 2 plus. We replace it by exactly 2, and we see what happens. This becomes 8 plus 4, which is a 12, over 2 plus 2, which is 4, and the 12 over 4 is 3. Notice here that we remove the limit sign when we substitute and we get numbers. Now, what is the limit as x tends to negative 1 in this case? But here we have negative 1 minus. If we substitute, we get negative 1 over 0. Now, we agreed before that a number over 0 tends to infinity. But does it tend to plus infinity or minus infinity? We don't know. That's why we have to check up whether this 0 is 0 plus or 0 minus. Now, how do we check? We draw a small sign table for x plus 1. Now, this is x plus 1. Its root is negative 1. And because it's of degree 1, we use opposite, same. Now, what do we mean by negative 1 minus? This minus, which is here, means that we are on the left of negative 1. So we are on the left of negative 1. And in this case, if we are on the left of negative 1, you see x plus 1 is negative. So this 0 becomes negative. So this is negative 1 over 0 minus, which tends to plus infinity. Now, let's see some applications. The question is to find the following limits. This is the first limit. Please try to find it, pause the video, and then compare your answer with the given answer. Now here I'd like to tell you something about limits, that we can distribute this limit, and if we have the limit, let's say, of f of x plus g of x, this would be the limit of f of x plus the limit of g of x. Now, for the first limit, in this case, we have number over infinity, which is 0, and the limit of a constant is the constant itself, and here we get a 1. Now, in this case, we get 4 over 0. As we said before, this is number over 0, which is infinity, but we have to specify whether this 0 is 0 plus or 0 minus. So we draw a sign table for 10 minus 5x. The root in this case is 2, and here we have to use the opposite same method. We get plus minus. Now, 2 plus, in this case, this 2 plus means to the right of 2, this is to the right of 2, and in this specific case, to the right of 2, 10 minus 5x is negative. So we can say that we have 4 over 0 minus, which is minus infinity.